Last two. They got it.
Oh, need copies of that. So now we're ready to move on to consent. Yes, Robert?
Yes.
All right. So with that, we do have one item on consent. That's the minutes of the October 3rd meeting. Do we have any slips to speak?
There's no public comment on this item.
No public comment. All right. Just making
Move to
sure.
approve.
All right, we have a motion to approve by Director Baines,
Second.
second by Director Hume. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously. So we have our approved minutes from October 3rd. Item 2, the blueprint, draft final, transportation project list and performance. Zach, welcome.
Great. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Zach Miller. I'm the program manager for the 2025 Blueprint. And today I'm going to be sharing with you what we've been doing to revise the transportation project list since the October committee meetings, how the revised transportation project list performs relative to the board adopted triple bottom line goals, how we are faring relative to achieving the greenhouse gas emissions target for the region. And finally, we'll be sharing the staff recommendation for the transportation project list. Jumping into the agenda here, I'll be starting with a summary of the engagement that staff has conducted since October committees. I'll then provide a summary of the progress on the triple bottom line as it relates to the draft final scenario. So as a reminder, that draft final scenario is the combined land use assumptions that were adopted by this board, combined with the draft final transportation network under consideration here today. Then I'll be getting into how the draft final scenario performs relative to the greenhouse gas target, and then provide the staff recommendation for your consideration as well as action. So at committees in October, staff received two very significant pieces of feedback. One being that they should continue to account for local priorities and input by continuing to work with transportation project sponsors to further refine the project list. And to do this, do so by not compromising the region's ability to remain within striking distance of the greenhouse gas target. So using this direction, staff held additional meetings with transportation project sponsors to gather more information on projects for the draft project list. So SACOG staff worked to accommodate changes proposed by local staff where there was new information on projects, on how those projects align with the triple bottom line policy objectives. Worked on projects that could be paid for by reasonably foreseeable revenues, and then also worked on projects where local resources were already paying for improvements. So staff and project sponsors made every effort to prioritize and include the transportation projects that were identified as local priorities by sponsors. However, we were not able to accommodate all requests for road and highway capacity projects to be included without eroding the plan's performance in key areas, most specifically in the achievement of the regional greenhouse gas target. Finally, on the engagement front, during the second round of engagement that's been ongoing since late August, early September, we did not hear during that round of engagement from some project sponsors throughout the region. We proactively identified and reached out to sponsors that had not provided any comments to date on the transportation project list to ensure that their understanding of the list, as well as their priorities, were being accurately reflected. So that brings us to where we are here today, the staff recommendation for the transportation investments of the 2025 Blueprint. So now I'll be getting into the development of the transportation project list and its performance across the triple bottom line and the scenario's performance relative to the greenhouse gas target. So as a brief refresher, staff began screening the full list of nominated projects to determine those that would best serve the land use pattern that was adopted by this board in June. So this screening process was really rooted in the triple bottom line policy goals and yielded the first iteration of the transportation project list. So as a reminder, we received roughly double the amount of proposed road and highway capacity projects as reasonably foreseeable we could afford in the time frame of the plan, that being out to 2050. We then went through an extensive sponsor engagement process from which feedback received during that process was used to identify local priorities and refine the transportation list. So this list that you see in front of you here today is the fourth iteration of the list, which includes 3 cycles of transportation project sponsor input and feedback that were collected by SACOG staff. It's important to note that local priorities and feedback were collected and considered in the context of the musts of fiscal constraint, as well as achieving the greenhouse gas target per the direction of the board and our requirements of the plan. So that's all just to say that not all requests by project sponsors were able to be added into the list. So moving on to the progress on the triple bottom line that this draft final scenario has. So nested within the triple bottom line are goal statements, which provide additional details on how the 2025 blueprint should support equity, economy, as well as the environment. So the table before you includes a number of different performance metrics that correspond with and show performance relative to these goal statements in the triple bottom line. So on the whole, you can see that the scenario in front of you here today would go a long way in improving and expanding transportation alternatives available to the region's population, as well as improving their access and proximity to jobs and services. This scenario would also improve equity across the region through improving many of these same metrics up on the screen here in the table, specifically in environmental justice areas as well. And then finally, it would result in better environmental outcomes in terms of transportation efficiency as well as emissions. So next, moving on to the greenhouse gas target. So now beginning into how this draft final scenario performs relative to our state greenhouse gas target. So the table on the screen in front of you includes all of the land use and transportation inputs that staff has included, as well as additional greenhouse gas reduction strategies that were needed to hit the target. Starting with the land use and transportation category in the table you see here on the screen, these include the land use assumptions that were adopted by the board, the staff recommended transportation project list before you here today, as well as carrying forward the mileage-based user fee from the 2020 plan. The next, under the GHG reduction strategies, these are all the additional GHG reduction strategies that are needed to be included in order to achieve our greenhouse gas target. And these were also strategies that were included in some form in the 2020 plan as well. So these strategies are those that we as staff see as feasible and necessary to remain within striking distance of the greenhouse gas target. So it's important to note that the 2020 MTPSCS was adopted by our board and approved by CARB. So these are GHG strategies that we as staff have a high level of confidence in for helping us achieve the greenhouse gas target. Then at a higher level, you can see in this table, based on the board adopted land use assumptions, the staff recommended transportation network, and the identified additional greenhouse gas reduction strategies being included, we're calculating that the region will be achieving the greenhouse gas target by 2035. So staff believe that the reduction strategies and approach to calculating the greenhouse gas performance of the plan in front of you here today represents a sound and defensible case to demonstrate that the plan would achieve the state mandated greenhouse gas reduction target. However, also as noted in the slide in front of you, it's important to note that the California Air Resources Board must ultimately review and approve SACOG's GHG calculation methodology and confirm that the GHG strategies we're including, as well as the calculation methodology. So SACOG staff has provided CARB with documentation outlining these strategies and our quantification approach. So these conversations are ongoing and would and could affect the performance of the plan, creating some risk given the small margin by which we're achieving the target currently. So staff is committed to keeping the board appraised of any potential changes that would jeopardize the plan's ability to hit the greenhouse gas target, including options for addressing any potential erosion of the plan's performance if that shall occur. Now, moving on to the staff recommendation. So this transportation project list is staff and project sponsors' best attempt to achieve the triple bottom line goals of the plan, incorporate the priorities of the transportation project sponsors, and set the plan up to hit the greenhouse gas target. So the staff recommendation, staff recommend that the Land Use and Natural Resources Committee recommend that the SACOG Board of Directors adopt the final transportation project list to be part of the final preferred scenario for the 2025 blueprint. And then in terms of next steps, so this will be going to the board obviously later this month on the 14th, next Thursday. So following adoption of the transportation project list, staff will begin drafting of the 2025 blueprint plan document, and the board will really turn to developing the policies for the plan. This will also occur in parallel to the development of the environmental impact report for the plan. So the draft blueprint plan, as well as the EIR, are planned to be released to the public for a public review in May of 2025, and then plan adoption is scheduled for November of 2025. So that concludes my presentation. I'll flip it back to the staff recommendation here for your benefit. I'll pass it to you.
Thank you very much, Zach, for all the work and for all the staff work that's gone into this. We do have one slip to speak. I'll turn to my colleagues to see if there are any brief questions to begin. Otherwise, we'll take some public testimony and then bring it back for further deliberation. See nobody jump out front. We'll go ahead and take some public testimony. And I have one slip to speak at the moment. John Griffin, come on up.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. I am John Griffin, Director of Public Works for the City of Galt. First, I want to recognize and thank the Blueprint team of Sam Sheldon, Zach Miller, and Hannah Schuden for all of their hard work and collaboration with the City of Galt. I know they put a lot of hard work into this effort over the last several years and the challenges that they are trying to tackle head on to meet these objectives. I want to take a minute to speak out in support of the city's projects that are on the Blueprint. The city has seen a significant amount of growth, not only residential, but also commercial and industrial. These city projects are several critical projects to improve walkability and alternate modes of transportation within the city, as well as allowing us to move forward with environmental and engineering efforts for our second modern interchange. On behalf of the City of Galt, we support including the Walnut Avenue Interchange project, and we also support the project list in the 2025 blueprint. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. No other slips to speak?
No other slips, but we did receive 2 public comment letters. The first public comment letter was from Kate McCammon, Program Director with 350 Sacramento, Dan Allison, Action Team Lead, Sacramento Transit Advocates and Riders, STAR, Jeannie Ward-Waller, Interim Director, Climate Plan, Sophia Rafikova, Policy Advocate Coalition for Clean Air. And this letter has been posted to the SACOG website under the November 7, 2024 Land Use and Natural Resources Committee under handout number 2. We have also received a letter from Caltrans District 3 to be read into the record, and this comment letter has been posted to the SACOG website as handout number 1. I'll go ahead and read that now.
Very good.
Dear Mr. Corliss, on November 1st, 2024, Caltrans District 3 notified SACOG that 4 blueprint project list descriptions need to be changed. Cal 20828_B, Cal 20829_dual 1, Cal 20829_dual 2, and Cal 21260_dual, or we recommend that these projects be pulled from the blueprint. This action is a result of ongoing discussion between Caltrans and SACOG not being able to come to an agreement on the project list or the project descriptions. Excuse me. The current SACOG descriptions are too specific in detail, predetermine the project alternative, and prevent a reasonable range of alternatives. The currently drafted descriptions undermine CEQA by excluding alternatives and create an disingenuous public engagement process by identifying overly specific descriptions. In addition, the SACOG descriptions are focused on a singular environmental resource and do not take into consideration other resource impacts. We have provided multiple compromises to this situation with the hopes of finding a project description that both agencies can move forward with. As we've discussed with SACOG, Caltrans is not opposed to 2035 and 2050 preferred scenario managed lane network being included in the blueprint model so the region's GHG targets can be met. As long as the project descriptions do not predetermine the project alternative, and there is a clear statement that the project assumptions in the blueprint model are for modeling purposes. As the owner and operator of the state highway system, we cannot support these projects as they are currently listed. And if they cannot be modified, are requesting SACOG to pull these projects from the blueprint project list. Sincerely, Sergio Seves, District 3 Director. That ends the public comment letter.
Very good. Okay, thank you for that, Robert. Okay, I'll turn to Vice Chair Lozano. If you had any final comments regarding your staff's testimony under public comment?
No, I think the point of Mr. Griffin's comments was really to thank the SACOG staff for all of the work, not necessarily just the GALT work, but certainly their outreach to the project applicants and everything they did to reaffirm understanding and that sort of thing. So we appreciate Mr. Griffin coming down and speaking. Thank you.
Very good. Other thoughts or comments on the item before us? It is our only action item this afternoon. Sir, Director.
I have a question, I guess, to staff, pertaining the letter that came from Caltrans. So is this addressed in going forward, or was this something we'll handle next week make the changes?
Yeah, so we thought this would be a good topic of discussion, and Director Aceves was here this morning at the Transportation Committee. He has a seat on that committee, and we had a very full discussion during that Transportation Committee as an information item. So we figured that you would have a discussion here on this. The question really being raised by Caltrans, and by the way, we have our environmental attorney, Amy Higuera, on the line. So she did speak to this concern this morning, and she is available today. In the letter, the Caltrans, in the first paragraph, the key to this really is that our project descriptions are too specific and predetermine the project alternative and prevent a reasonable range of alternatives. That's the key question. And I will just say from the staff perspective, we think it's so important to be specific because part of those managed lanes is what gets us to that 19.1% greenhouse gas reduction. And we do not believe, and I'm happy to have Amy address this, that being specific in the plan actually requires you to build what's in the plan. If that were the case, we'd be hearing this from all of your jurisdictions every time we do a plan. So we do have a bit of a disagreement on this. And again, I know Caltrans D3 wanted to be here, couldn't have a representative. The letter stands in front of you. We went through vague project language in the 2020 MTP SCS. We had vague language per Caltrans request on the YOLO 80 project. And I will just tell you, it created all kinds of issues for us. It eventually led to an alternative of dual lanes not being studied in the EIR. And now Caltrans has to go back and restudy that alternative. And we don't want to recreate that issue. So the staff recommendation stands from SACOG, as you just heard, to adopt the project list and the project descriptions as they stand. We have made a commitment this morning with Director Aceves to get our teams together on Tuesday morning and just see if we could work through this before the board meeting on Thursday. We'll report back to you on that Thursday.
So, so we will have an opportunity between now and Thursday. You will meet, and so it could be staff's recommendation is changed on Thursday with some amendments as per their
It could
request.
be, yeah, we could have a different approach for you. It would be very slightly different. But at the moment, it's our very strong recommendation for you as the board. This is your metropolitan transportation plan. So for you as the board to be specific as you would be with just about every other project that's in here, and to not go with sort of vague language that allows that will then flow into an EIR. The EIR looks at all the alternatives, and maybe at this point, Amy came onto screen, and Cameron, if as the chair, if you want to.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. Have Amy kind of frame it for us. That'd be good.
You want to hear with Amy?
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear the end of that, but I'm assuming
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm
Amy.
okay to go. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say, as the lead agency for the blueprint plan itself, your responsibility under CEQA is to have a project description that's sufficiently detailed so that you can provide a meaningful analysis. And so when you have modeling assumptions that are going into kind of your conclusions about what the blueprint's impacts are going to be, those modeling assumptions should be described as part of your project description so that, you as the decision maker and the public can really understand what the plan is and what its impacts are going to be. And doing that doesn't predetermine any outcome in the future for both, once you do your analysis, you will then decide whether to approve the final blueprint. And once you do that, that is, it's an aspirational document. It is the plan that if its projects are ultimately developed, it should reach the greenhouse gas reductions that you've projected. But it relies on implementation by future projects. And when those future projects go through their own CEQA review, they might determine that there are other reasons that they need to change certain specifics of the project, and they can do that. To the extent they do change projects and they want to come back to SACOG for funding, they'll need to have there might need to be a plan update at that point. But that's something that happens pretty regularly. And, so long as you're still achieving the greenhouse gas reductions, it's something that can be done. So it's by adopting the final project list, you're not constraining other agencies to not be able to do anything other than what's in that project list.
Right. That's very helpful. Director Kozlowski, yes, sir.
Yeah, with respect, I mean,
Yeah.
with respect to what you just said, I mean, we've had this discussion on several occasions about the blueprint being a plan for the future, not a crystal ball that describes the future in detail. But we have to have a plan that is granular enough and detailed enough to be able to outline a possible future where we do meet the greenhouse gas emissions. So we live in this land of passive aggressiveness here in California, but the letter that we received from Caltrans, I would say, is just plain old aggressive, and it uses some language that I find a little troubling with respect to the fact that we've literally had this exact discussion of the fact that the blueprint is not the absolute description of the future, and that there is the chance for every agency who has a project in the preferred list or the list or out there in the future has a chance to design those according to their jurisdiction's, whims, I guess. So what's the problem? I mean, we've been accused of being disingenuous. I hate to put too fine a point on it, but what are we talking about? As I come in late to the discussion.
We covered that before you got here.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
So you're saying right now would be a good time for a fire drill? You weren't here when we were
Gave us
notified.
that too.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that was it. Okay. yes,
My
sir.
apologies if
No,
I'm rehashing.
No apologies. needed.
I might be able to help a little bit,
Okay.
at least not answer your question, Director Kozlowski, but
Sure, Mike,
certainly I happened to roll in here at the end of the transportation meeting. So, just because you never know how long it's going to get where you're going to go from Galt, right? So I was early by mistake. But I think, and I heard the director from Caltrans talk about it, and I think one of his big hangups is exactly what we heard, but also that I think, as James pointed out, in our last MTP, we're real vague. And that's, I think, maybe where they may be working from and wanting to work from because of state policy or Caltrans policy. And certainly not defending. I was pretty, I wouldn't say offended, but taken back by the letter as well. But I think that may be where it is, and there may be not really an acknowledgement of what the plan, the effects of the plan are going to be for all jurisdictions, but just for Caltrans. And that's what I took from it.
Why is Caltrans special in this analysis? There's projects that are within their purview that are part of the plan. There are projects within Folsom's purview and Sacramento counties. We all have the same.
I would like to point out
Potential
that there are
futures.
projects, and again, I don't mean to talk without them in the room, but I would say the same thing if they were here. There are projects that go through many jurisdictions that are very specific about flood control signage on between this point and this point. And so I don't know why the vagueness for the three or four that he mentioned earlier, but certainly it didn't apply to all of the projects in which Caltrans' name was on.
I won't monopolize the discussion, but if there are alternatives that have already been identified, I'm willing to have a discussion about those, but otherwise,
All right.
thank
We'll-
you.
We'll get back with staff to explore those alternatives in a moment. So, Director Hume, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Appreciate the questions, and the irony is not lost on me that we have a state agency essentially threatening to throw us out of compliance with a plan that is mandated by the state to meet certain emissions. That is the reality we find ourselves in, though. And I don't know that Caltrans is any more or less equal than any other animal in the farm, but the reality is, if they are genuine in this letter and they decide to pull their project listings from our description list, that throws us in a bad way relative to those attainment goals. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So I guess kind of to Director Bain's point, I can wait till the full board meeting if you've got an ability to get heads together with Caltrans, but to the extent they're uncomfortable with being painted into a corner, and I recognize it's only one color of paint for the future, but if they're uncomfortable with feeling like their back is against the wall and that their future environmental process is undermined by statements that are made in our plan, we have to somehow bridge that gap for them. I mean,
Well, this is a really good 101 on what your responsibility is as a metropolitan planning organization, because your kind of fundamental responsibility is to develop a long-range plan and adopt that, and you have what's called project selection authority. That comes down from federal statute. So it is actually a very interesting thing to suggest that anybody could pull the projects from the plan. It's your plan at the end of the day. Now, maybe they could say, we don't want to be listed as a project sponsor. We don't want our name on that project, but it is your decision what to have in there. At the end, and this isn't, again, what we're looking at is not something that, our staff has come up with and never shared with Caltrans. In fact, I think in front of you have all the various iterations of these managed lanes that some of you have been very involved in, Chair Villegas, among others, over the last 12 months. So, I would just, we are going to work to see if we have been trying to figure out if there's a solution. If there's a bright line and the only solution is list the projects or pull them out of the plan, I would recommend you keep them in your plan because it's your plan. Maybe there's a way to figure out project sponsorship for now in the time, that we have. But I can't quite imagine if we got to a point where people were pulling projects out of a plan that you had to create to actually meet state and federal guidelines. This is your plan.
The nature of these projects generally is managed lanes
Yep.
on freeways, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and Caltrans lobbied incredibly hard to make sure that they had a board seat on the tolling authority that we created for that purpose.
Yeah.
So now they're not interested in managed lanes?
Well, to be fair, because they're not here, they believe that a specific project description will box them in, right? I wouldn't say that they would suggest they're not interested in managed lanes. They believe that a specific listing in our plan predetermines that they have to build that. We disagree, and Amy gave you her take on that, right? So I don't think they're not interested in managed lanes. I think they want to have the same approach they had 4 years ago for the YOLO 80 project, which was to be very general and not specific. And we're flagging that for you as a real issue.
So what is the, again, I apologize for monopolizing things. What is the specificity that is troubling? What is the unique thing about the description that is giving them trouble?
Kathleen,
Because we're talking about trying to reduce carbon emissions on those roads by managing the lanes. How is that a CEQA problem?
So I can describe, it's unfortunate they're not here, right? And we all hate to be in the position to kind of represent how they're feeling, but based on how discussions went this morning and at the staff level leading up to this staff report, because I just want to underscore that we didn't want to come with this situation to committees today. So accurate representation that their sort of starting point in the discussion was the 2020 level, which the description was something like implement managed lanes. No real description of what kind of managed lane or how many managed lanes on a particular corridor. And our real starting point was like, let's be very specific, more specific than what's in staff recommendations today about what exactly we put in our model to get to that 19.1 that Zach showed you today. So what you see is sort of a somewhere in between where we've tried to meet them closer to what they wanted. But as you see in the letter, it's still not as vague as general as they would like it to be. They have at different times suggested different pieces of the language that we have are too specific. This morning, they've offered to remove the word dual. We can talk about why we have an issue with that. There's also been some discussion of removing the second half of the way we describe their projects, which is where we describe whether or not it'll be a capacity addition or no capacity addition associated with the project. So it seems like they have some flexibility, but they just want to move towards more general. Best as I can describe their position without them being here.
So ultimately, they don't want to be responsible for a very specific segment of our greenhouse gas reduction strategy. Because you'll be able to work backwards from your guys' analysis to, hey, Caltrans is responsible for doing managed lanes to the point where they save X million, metric tons of carbon every year for us. You'll be able to do that. We would all be able to do that math ultimately.
Which is our intention as staff, right? To write a project description so that it's clear to you all, to the public, to our partners, what assumptions we made to reach the 19.1.
All right. Well, thank you, Kathleen, for that. Hang on one sec, just in case. Director Hume.
I don't know if you're the correct person to answer this, but
Let's try.
follow up on that exact kind of line of questioning and going back to what James said earlier, as far as we can list the project and it's up to them whether they build it, just like any other project from any other jurisdiction. If they then choose not to build it, we now have to account for that in the next update of the plan. So to the extent we say, forget you, this is what we're listing in our plan, and they come back and say, forget you, we're not gonna build that. And it becomes almost a spiteful thing now. I mean, I hate to project but I've seen weirder things happen. Then we have to now make up for that, to your point, and especially if it's quantifiable somewhere else, right?
in your next plan. Yeah. I mean, in your next plan, but you'll have a lot of things you're gonna have to juggle, right, in that next plan cycle. I do want to point out there's some really, well, it might take a bit of explanation, but you've got some nice colorful maps in front of you that show a little bit of the evolution of the managed lane network from the 2020 MTP SES into earlier iterations this year. Kathleen's at microphone because she's been leading the charge on a lot of our work back and forth with D3. And I will say maybe they'll never build it. I mean, we are now, 90%, 95% of the way to sort of see eye to eye on a version. And Chair Villegas, you know this from being on Carter, right? We've done a lot of work as staff. We're very close to a certain scenario, right? Which is one that we're pulling into the plan. So we're not suggesting something outlandish or that hasn't been worked on.
I think, are there any other comments on this? So if I can just start to begin to try to put a bow on this thing. So express concerns, not liking so much the letter. Tuesday might provide some alternatives or a path that might look slightly different. You do have there's a staff recommendation. We've spent a tremendous amount of time and energy resources on putting this list together. even doubling down on our efforts to make sure that everybody has seen it with eyes wide open. But you did reference earlier, the prospects of, project sponsorships, or sponsorship, I should say. Should we, I mean, if we were to move forward with what's proposed today, with some flexibility to explore that in the event that that's needed to give us maximum flexibility to move forward with our list as proposed, so not suggesting we modify the list, but simply maybe, for a Caltrans style analogy, maybe take a different route to the same location, right? Different roadway. Is that something that you're interested in, or do you need to share thoughts
No,
on that?
we'd recommend that you move forward the staff recommendation today. You direct us to meet with District 3, right, early next week. And then you're an advisory body to the full board. So move it to the full board per the staff recommendation. Ask us to continue to work with Caltrans District 3. And let's see what we can give you on Thursday at the full board.
Okay. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Wanted to clarify that it's not a moving document, but it kind of is. I mean, we're making we're documenting something in time that's subject to change, and none of us got everything we wanted. So none of us are completely happy.
Mhm.
That's what I kind of get, right? But we're happy because we understand that as projects are completed and drop off, others will come in,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. This is a little different. I'm so surprised by this because this is,
I think it's a fundamental difference in understanding of what our plan is and what it's not. Does our plan require you to build what's in the plan? We don't believe that's true, and that's never borne out to be the case. So I think there literally is a sort of a fund. And so if I see one thing and you see the opposite, right, we're going to try to negotiate, but we'll try other routes, as I've mentioned earlier. But I do, again, I'm going to come back to, this is your plan, and you have to be specific, as Amy was describing, in terms to meet all of your federal and state goals. We'll do what we can to try to figure out if there's a creative path with Caltrans. But you know, it's also, by the way, it's just good transparency to list actually what's in the plan. To be clear, in addition to being, I think, good by our CEQA. So give us a chance, one more, and we'll report back to you next Thursday.
So what do you need from us at this point? You want a motion?
I'll move to recommend staff's recommendation to the full board.
Second.
So we have a motion. We have a second by Vice Chair Lozano, a motion by Director Hume. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Right, so got a motion, some direction. Thank you, James. Thank you to the staff. Thank you, Zach. Yep, very good.
By the way, I just want to say, we don't typically do this. This is Zach Miller's second to last day, our Blueprint project manager here. He's worked incredibly hard. We kind of threw him off the deep end, about a year ago, less than a year ago? Year and a half, okay. Year and a half ago.
And you made him
He's
quit.
been the face of the Blueprint, and he really did step in. You've never necessarily really worked for a full board in an agency like this before, so he's done an amazing job to keep us on track. Because we lost our last Blueprint project manager to go run the San Benito Council of Governments. Zach is going to the state to work on VMT mitigation banks, right? So one of the downsides of being right here in the Capitol is we lose good people to do good things, but that actually is also a great opportunity for Zach. So I just want to say he's done a great job. He's been diligent. He's been in front of you all the time, and tomorrow's his last day. So I just want to say thank you to Zach for getting us to this point.
It's not lost on me. You waited. You waited until there was a motion and a second and a vote before you let him.
That's right. Very good. Congratulations. Thank you, Zach. Good luck to you. Yeah, very good. All right. Yeah,
Thank you, Zach.
well done. All right, that takes us to item 3, which is the Greenfield development in the context of achieving air quality and climate goals. That's Doug.
I think I'm also going to set this one up just briefly. So as you may have forgotten, because it's been 5 months, you all had some very good debate here, right, about Greenfield developments all the way through the spring. Director Hume brought a couple of bullet points in June. You had what we like to call robust discussion. That's what we term that.
Is that how you remember it?
But look, and we're working on those. And by the way, we will come back next month, as I have told Director Hume. And so stay tuned for us to come back on those suggestions. But in the meantime, the Sacramento Air Quality Management District Board also asked their staff to look into something very similar, right? How can we make greenfields greener? How can we make sure that they reduce vehicle miles traveled and air pollution? So because we have a great working relationship and an MOU with the Air District, SMUD and SAC-RT, we've jointly looked into this. We did a presentation, as Director Hume knows, as Director Frost knows, right, to the Sacramento Air Quality Management District last month. So this is, we're going to have our staff here, along with Paul Philly from AQMD, present the same thing here. This is in many ways a setup and a bit of a background to come back to those bullet points that Director Hume had put in front of you all. So we hadn't forgotten about that. And this is really part one.
Great.
Actually, before you get started, Doc, we want to make sure, make clear, you're not leaving, right?
No, not
We
anytime soon.
got him from the state
Yeah.
and we aim to keep him. So
Got us once. Okay, go ahead.
Actually, Zach is headed to the same building I was at. So yeah. So thank you very much, and happy to be here today with Paul to talk through greenfield development in the context of achieving our air quality and our climate goals. So here's a roadmap for today's discussion. I'm going to provide a little bit of background on some roles and responsibilities for reducing greenhouse gas emissions in our region. I'll tie that back to our role under SB 375. Hone in a little bit on how greenfield development specifically impacts those goals. And then I'll turn it over to Paul, who's going to walk through some really interesting and fascinating kind of examples and case studies from our region to kind of help illustrate, what some of the challenges are facing greenfield development in the context of these goals. And we'll have a little bit of a discussion, I think, about solutions and opportunities moving forward. So greenhouse gas emissions, of course, come from a variety of sectors that's shown on the bottom of the chart here, and then addressing those is a shared responsibility across multiple entities, which is shown above the chart there. So within our region, we have cities, counties, utilities, air districts, SACOG, all that have kind of a role in developing strategies to reduce emissions across all of these sectors. The air district has a hand in quite a few of these, including all of that pink on-road sources. That's the largest source of emissions in our region. And you can think about that pink on-road sources sector as being made up of just travel to and from work, running errands, shepherding kids around, the collective daily travel of the residents in our region. The greenhouse gas emissions from that driving is determined by both the vehicle technology as well as just how much people are driving. The Air District is looking at all of that. SACOG's just focused on the how much people are driving part. So at SACOG, and I know you can probably recite this in your sleep at this point, but our responsibility under state law is governed by SB 375, and it's to develop a long-range plan, what we're calling our 2025 blueprint, that integrates the land use and transportation planning to reduce emissions from total driving. And of course, we have that 19% per capita greenhouse gas reduction target. It's below 2005 levels. We have to show how we can actually achieve that by 2035. And we do that with a set of strategies, a set of land use assumptions. Of course, we adopted those in June. Transportation assumptions, we just talked about those, that can reduce the amount that people need to drive on a daily basis. And we call that metric vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. And we deliver that reduction in VMT through two primary mechanisms, right? The first is we're trying to, on average, over time, reduce the distance between destinations, right? So that the trip length itself is slightly shorter over time. And then number two, we're trying to provide residents with more transportation options that are, convenient, safe, reliable, that give them an opportunity for some of those trips to maybe leave their car at home. So today's discussion revolves around how do we do that? What is the role of greenfield in all of that? But maybe before we jump into the greenfield question, just want to briefly touch on the connection between VMT and greenhouse gas emissions, considering some of the advancements that have, of course, happened in vehicle technology. And this is, of course, one of the first things that usually comes up when we say, okay, we have a greenhouse gas emissions target from transportation. It's what about zero emission vehicles, right? Doesn't that sort of fix the kind of pink part of that graphic? And over time, it is obviously true, right? Electric vehicles have a tremendous potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. The state is, of course, developing standards for car fuel efficiency. They're providing incentives for zero emission vehicle purchases. We have a 2035 target year for all new vehicles in the state to be zero emission vehicles for sales. And I think the point of this graph is trying to show that that transition is still going to take some time. And just kind of even assuming that that 35 target is real, right? And we are going to be all electric sales are going to be electric. Gas-powered cars are going to make up a majority of the fleet in 2035 and probably will for some time. And this is why the state is kind of looking to regions to help reduce emissions that are associated specifically with the VMT. They'd still be falling short of, the near-term climate goals without that multi-prong approach. So the GHG target assigned to our region is part of that overarching strategy to kind of accelerate the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions as we kind of go across this graph towards the right. So just to try to put that succinctly, while EVs matter for climate, gas-powered cars are going to be around for a while. So hitting our GHG targets is going to require reducing vehicle miles traveled. We cannot electrify our way out of that sort of responsibility on the VMT side. So how do we reduce VMT? Well, based on decades of work on this, we know that addressing VMT means that we have to think through and address the land use question. How and where is the region growing over time? So of particular importance is how much the region is growing outward through greenfield development, and what does that greenfield development actually look like? And that's perhaps the most important question for us as a body as we think about reducing emissions from passenger vehicles in the context of what we're responsible for. So when we say greenfield development, I think we've used the term developing communities as part of our land use assumptions. They mean the same thing. It's a little bit of a subjective term, but we're generally talking about development that's on the periphery of the existing urban footprint, right? And is expanding that footprint outward over time. In the context of VMT, that typically means that you're just not as close to where people need to go, which requires households to travel further distances for their daily travel. And then on the flip side, places with lots of stuff nearby, particularly places that are more centrally located, maybe you have the ability to travel to destinations in multiple directions, they tend to have lower than average VMT. And this is kind of borne out, this phenomenon is borne out in all of these VMT maps that we're showing, the 2012, 2016, and 2020. These are observed VMT, this is not modeled, right? And they show the same thing. The colors look relatively similar as you go over time, with the green kind of being below regional average, the orange and the red being above it. And you can kind of think of that as a form of gravity, right? Where there's these nodes with the most destinations, places with a mix of both jobs, as well as services and shopping and restaurants, and they act as a magnet to households across the region. And the further you are from those magnets, the further you have to travel. And I think the first kind of large point that I just want to make is that all else equal, the location of the greenfield really matters for its eventual VMT. And I'm going to use an example here of two greenfield projects that are under construction now in the SACOG region. The colors here are representing planned land uses. So, light tan is sort of single family, brown multifamily, red commercial, green parks, right? And on first glance, they look relatively similar, right? They have a mix of densities and uses. If anything, maybe the plan on the left might have higher densities. And however, when you look at how people are actually driving in these places after build out, this is in 2050, the VMT is actually close to double the regional average, some of the highest in the region for the plan on the left, while the one on the right is around or even below regional average. So what happened here? And I think essentially what's happening is if you live in the area on the left, you have to travel a pretty good distance to get to most of your destinations. While the area on the right, you can't really see it with the hexes, but you have a huge job center, industrial job center immediately to the north. Stockton Boulevard is about 3 miles west of here. So all of the restaurants and Little Saigon is all there. You have Elk Grove just immediately to the south of this. You have spatial efficiency. And it's really not, in this case, that everyone is taking transit and walking and biking to work. It's more just that the vehicle trip lengths, the distances that they have to go, are significantly less on the right. So the point here is that for the purposes of planning for for lower VMT in greenfields, the location can sometimes just be really hard to overcome if you're just really far from where people need to go and there isn't that kind of existing base of destinations relatively in close proximity. So the second just larger point before I turn it over to Paul is that while the regional location is just really important as a factor for VMT, there's just many things that a greenfield development can do to influence the VMT of the households that are kind of eventually going to live in that community. And interestingly, many of the solutions that we look to deploy to reduce VMT in greenfields are the same principles that the SACOG region adopted in the original blueprint 20 years ago. And so those are the ones on the screen. And actually, when we adopted the blueprint, it really wasn't explicitly about greenhouse gas emissions at all. It was addressing general air quality issues, congestion, conversion of, rural and working lands, just overall quality of life metrics. And, these happen to be great VMT strategies, but they also help to accomplish other goals. And I guess that is illustrated by, I guess, an example, just thinking about our shared goals with the air district. Reducing VMT actually reduces air pollution, even if all of the vehicles are electric, right? Because you still get less brake and tire particles in the air, which, actually some of the research is indicating is going to be even more of a challenge with EVs because they're heavier vehicles. So there's just a lot of reasons to be reducing VMT beyond just greenhouse gas emissions. But setting the regional location aside, the primary ways to reduce VMT in a greenfield are to plan for what we talk about as a complete community. And there is no inherent reason that a greenfield development has to be planned as a bedroom community, right, of large lot single family homes and nothing else. And there are several communities in our region that are really employing a lot of these ideas and strategies today. So key features of a complete community that we kind of know reduce vehicle miles traveled are, ensuring that there is a mix of uses with a balance of jobs and services and housing. Quality design with, more of a grid pattern and less of a cul-de-sac pattern, more housing choices with a mix of single family and townhomes and small scale multifamily and apartments and vertical mixed use. And this more compact built environment with vibrancy and density and quality design, yes, it means your vehicle trips are shorter, but it also helps to facilitate another key blueprint principle, which is transportation choices, right? Choices beyond just the car. And that is because if you live on a quarter-acre lot and everything around you is single-family homes on larger lots, you're just more likely to be a good distance from schools and grocery stores and restaurants or your job. And if you're, so your trip lengths are long and there really just isn't that kind of other opportunity. There's not a viable other option besides a car for those trips. And then on the flip side, if you live in a gridded neighborhood with higher densities, a mix of homes and destinations, suddenly transit might become viable to provide from the transit agency. And you might kind of have walking and biking trips become possible for some of these trips. And it's that combination of the shorter trips and the transportation choices that are kind of coalescing into that kind of, that's facilitating, I guess, the lower VMT environment that we're talking about. So just to sum up the key points before I hand it over to Paul here. So different government entities responsible for different pieces of the climate mitigation pie. SACOG and the Air District do overlap in our role of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, specifically from VMT, and then the Air District is looking at stuff beyond that. As it relates to Greenfield, the location really matters for VMT, with some locations just being really challenging to kind of overcome, even with smart planning. But that said, there are just many things that we can do in the planning of Greenfield to reduce their VMT, and it's mostly revolving around this complete community idea where you have a mix of compact homes, jobs, and services. So with that, I will turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Dov. Chair, members of the committee. Sorry, is that better?
Yep.
Okay. Chairs, members of the committee, I'm Paul Philly, a program manager with the Sac Metro Air District, and I get to do my own slides today, which is exciting. And I've had the pleasure and privilege of professionally planning in this region for about 16 years. And we've been able to sort of see stuff go from ideas and concepts to vertical and lived in. And I wanted to share a bit about the changes that we've seen in the region and how that affects VMT. I will say that I do work for the Sac Metro Air District, so it's just Sac County, but we do have counterparts in Yolo Solano and Feather River Air Districts. And words are going to be a little bit different, so I'll try to regional it up a bit. So if there's any questions, feel free to jump in. But this process typically happens around the region. But at least in Sacramento County, we really started looking at environmental review and air quality in VMT in 1993 with the adoption of Sac County's general plan. And it had an air quality policy 15, which said that all development projects that had a significant impact had to have a 15% reduction in their air quality emissions. And this has been adopted by almost all other jurisdictions within the county. And so we have a section at the Air District that looks at these plans, and they're generally created by the developer. The Air District is sort of the fair umpire that qualifies the plan and works with the developer to get it to its targets, and then it's ultimately approved and enforced by the local jurisdiction. And as you can see, the colorful map, Elk Grove, Galt, I think everywhere except Isleton has an active air quality mitigation plan within our jurisdiction. So the first point that I'd like to make as sort of lessons learned is that development takes a long time. Here we have two development examples, and over 2 decades, 20 years, you can see, especially the one on the right, you have the mass grading going on. And, you know, in 23, you've now starting to get the houses in, but there's still lots of blank spaces in these projects. And there's lots of market cyclication and development issues and pressures and other pieces. But in general, what we put today, it's going to be a very long time before everything gets up and vertical. The consequence of that is that even when we do try to get a complete community, there's key aspects of the community that aren't a part of the plat that you're looking at. So here's an example that was doing its mass grading back in 2004, where they're putting in the backbone infrastructure. And it's 5 years later that you get your first locally serving commercial use, which was a drugstore. And it was very exciting. All 5 council members were out for the ribbon cutting. And finally, you didn't have to leave the jurisdiction to go get your milk. It then took another 7 years before you get your backbone trail infrastructure and your local schools so that kids can start getting up to school without having to be driven by their parents. Another 2 years, then you finally get the park with all the ball fields, you get your second community center, you get your elementary school. And today, we're now 2 decades on, we still don't have a middle school or a high school, and the nearest one is 12 miles away. So there are a lot of trips that are happening between these communities. And the plan is for them to have one very soon, provided elections and bonds and other things come through. But when you are planning these communities, try to be mindful that there will be periods of time where key features aren't there. So if those features are nearby in the next door development, that's what the residents are going to be using for a generation. And this is sort of borne out within SACOG's plan. So looking at your plan, we see that regional average centers and quarters in established communities have lower than regional average. The developing communities, the ones that are currently building out, are still higher than the regional average. And a big piece of that is because they don't quite yet have all of the pieces they need to be a complete community, or they have locational efficiency difficulties. The ones that you're going to start today, that first home is going to generally have very high VMT, which is the potential developing communities, until eventually they get built out. Now, here's one that was approved back in 1994, so this is 30 years later. And you can see that it has, in general, blueprintish principles in the 2D plan. There's a town center, there's parks, there's schools. It has jobs and industrial. It has commercial over by the freeway. And in general, it built out mostly to plan. It got the jobs and all the other pieces. There wasn't quite enough market forces in the surrounding area to create the critical mass necessary for the town center to be built. It's been 30 years and it's still blank, and it's unfortunate. And if you look at the VMT snippet, you can see that there is a lot of blank to the right and to the north. And so there's not enough customers and density and people to create the critical mass to have it develop into a node. And so it has higher VMT than the rest of the city. If you're looking at other places, though, there are some places in the region that build out very, very quickly. So this is probably one of the fastest building communities or new growth areas that I've seen in my time here in the region. And it's 10 years later, and there's already more than 8,000 people living in the community. However, we still don't have fixed route transit yet. We don't have transportation demand management services yet. And the jurisdiction's working very hard to get buses and other services out there, but it takes a lot of intentionality. The environmental document, as you can see, had a very specific transportation plan, but plans changed. The town center is now becoming a health hub. I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, but the jurisdiction had to go get a grant and relook at its transit system and think about ways to integrate it into the region. So the thing about new growth is it's not automatic. It takes a lot of jurisdictional capacity and focus and effort from not only the jurisdiction, but also the region to get all of the services that we're expecting. And that can sometimes take focus from other areas. So making sure that we finish our communities, complete them, and get them plugged into the transportation, the sustainable transportation system of the region is kind of key to making sure that the newer growth areas are able to keep their VMTs as low as possible. There's also changes to the plan that sometimes don't facilitate low VMTs. Oftentimes, communities have key features that don't end up panning out. So this is one that I worked on back when I was a staffer at this jurisdiction. And there was supposed to be a school in the middle of the community so where all the kids could walk to. And the school district decided to put the school half a mile north of the community past the urban services boundary. So the school wasn't built. And because the school wasn't built, there wasn't a need to build the park. And then some of the higher density residential got lowered. And the sustainable modes bridge over the local interstate wasn't built either. And so it was really difficult for this project to hit the VMT targets that was originally thought about back in 2005 because of changes that a lot of it, quite frankly, beyond the jurisdiction's control. So when that happens, being an air district, I'm thinking about emissions and not necessarily about VMT. And so oftentimes a lot of the plans have different areas where you can go after reductions. And when we're talking about 93 and 2004 and back in the good old days, it was about on-road and reducing VMT, and there's lots of those pieces, very blueprint-esque principles. As we've gotten further on, we've started to see a shift from reductions about vehicles to reductions associated with the building itself. So you're seeing more chargers, you're seeing a removal of natural gas and going all electric. For example, if you have a single family home and you use all electric or no NOx appliances, you can get an ozone precursor reduction of about 15%. And so if you're not able to get these VMT reductions, you can oftentimes make it up on the other end. The problem with that, of course, is if you are looking at a VMT reduction and you're relying on a VMT reduction, but you're doing offsite mitigation or emission reduction credits or zero emission technology, you're still adding those trips to your transportation networks. And so a recent example we had is there was a 2008 plan with a very robust active modes network. And it just became too expensive for the developer to continue to put in these pedestrian bridges. And so they removed it and they offset the anticipated reductions by going with low NOx appliances and zero NOx appliances. So from an air quality standpoint, we've kept air quality whole, but from an SB 743, which is now becoming more and more of a requirement, we weren't able to keep the VMT low. So sort of a summary of all of that is that one is development takes a long time. It's for those of you who are fortunate enough to be around, we've seen the region grow and change, and we know that it takes a lot of time just from getting things planned to approved to built to moved in and so forth. Next is that greenfield developments are gonna have a higher VMT during build out than when they're finished. Right now, you guys are generally pretty good at approving complete communities. They're not complete until 2040. They're not complete until 2050. And we have interim goals that we want to achieve. And then even when we complete those communities, based on locations, you are going to have higher VMTs if you're not really thoughtful about where that project is in the region. The other thing is that 20 years is a long time and things change. So measures can degrade over time. either because of cultural changes or because the plans change. We're now getting things in boxes. People aren't coming into the offices as much, and that's going to change your VMT assumptions as the plans move forward. And finally, at least in Sacramento County, I don't want to speak for the other air districts, but our processes have been mostly focused on criteria air pollutants and greenhouse gases and not necessarily on vehicle miles traveled. And so when we have our sister agencies that are sort of relying upon low VMT communities and those jurisdictions trade low VMT reducing projects for emission reducing projects, that can create regional issues. So sort of considerations that we'd ask you to take back to your respective jurisdictions is that as you are building out especially large greenfield developments, try to phase project entitlement and development to complete the ones that you have before you start on the next ones. There's only so many houses and so many people and so many shops, and so it's better to have one complete community instead of two half-built communities. Next is when you're planning your new greenfield communities, incorporate as much blueprint principles as you can, and then having contingency measures and triggers so that if amendments are necessary, you can be a bit more flexible and nimble with how you're able to replace it if the school district bails or if a project becomes too expensive, so that we can continue to have low emissions and low VMT. So I believe that's the close of the presentation, and Dov's here, I'm here, and James is here. So
Very
thank you
good.
kindly.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate the presentation. Very informative. Are there any questions by members of the committee?
I just have a quick question. You mentioned the 15% reduction that was implemented in the early 90s. Did that include state mandates that have come along since to reduce, or is that above and beyond that?
That was originally, I believe we got, like, no acronyms, federally implementation planned back in 90. And when we were putting together the state implementation plan to hit our ozone precursor targets, a lot of it was involved with land use because we don't have oil refineries, we don't have a lot of industry. And so Sacramento County stepped up and decided that construction sector and the development sector would be part of the solution. And so that's was adopted into their general plan, and you're with
City of Galt.
Yes, your general plan as well.
Okay, thank you.
Good. All right, thank you so much. I have to admit, I was a little bit hung up on your statement, and you moved very quickly, that as we figure out how to reduce our VMTs, we are often leaning heavily on electrification, electric vehicles, but the weight of those vehicles is not only going to quickly, and I'm a big proponent, but the reality is the weight of them is not insignificant. Our roads are deteriorating very quickly because of the weight. And I think I heard you just mention, and the weight of the vehicles, given the braking systems, unless those are fixed, we're adding pollutants in the air. So we seemingly take one step forward in one way, but we've managed to find a way to take a step backwards as well. So.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, go ahead.
My executive director often says that if we replace every gas engine with an electric engine, we'll have failed because of the particulate matter issue and because of the road maintenance issues. So it really is, we still need to get vehicle mile traveled reductions as part of the solution.
Interesting. But I also noted that I've heard this a million different times, but I heard it again today, and that is the way in which we address the emissions. There are multiple ways in which we can address that offset. So it's not a one for one necessarily. So that's very helpful. So. All right. Any other comments, questions?
Here, Villegas, can I just try to plant the seed so that we can come back next month? And the reason for having this discussion in part, so Director Hume, one of your bullet points essentially said, we should analyze greenfield developments in the future for their ability to contribute a VMT, GHG reductions, right? And prioritize the ones that have the most contribution to reducing VMTs and GHGs. So part of the reason we wanted to give you this foundation, right, is, as you know, you're often reminding us, it's complicated out there in the real world, right? Things don't always build as we planned them, right? So that's one issue you just heard today, is things don't always turn out the way we have intended, right? Number one. Number two, things don't also go in an orderly fashion. So we build one greenfield and make it complete, and then we go on to the next, right? We've had a lot of those discussions the first half of this year. So in our analysis, are we looking at the complete greenfield in terms of the final? Are we looking at a point in time, which unless we have different local policies, we're going to be a point in time, and 20% of that one will have built and 30% of that one will have built, and right? So these are just as we get into coming back to your bullet points, we just wanted to give you some of the stuff we're trying to wrestle with. We all want new development, right, to be as efficient as possible. But how we actually go about that in the future per the bullet points, what assumptions we make, and even in the difference between a CEQA analysis and our blueprint analysis is quite different. What you can assume around you and building out right next to you. So hold that if you can in mind before we come back. Because I think the principle of we want to prioritize the sort of the greenest greenfields is good. But actually how we might do that, right, I think is a little bit of the question. Make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
To ask, you talked about VMT being an important part of the whole equation. And is there a way to rationalize or calculate a percentage, like if you have this much reduction in VMT, then you can you can suffer the delays of, some of those other delays, or, is there a way to incentivize one part of it to accomplish, to get to your goal sooner, to actually communicate that to a developer, or, in the way we're building out our communities, so that the community's doesn't have all the amenities, but they have certain amenities that reduce VMT to the point where they're getting there faster. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so. There's sort of a tension between what we would like to happen and then sort of what's feasible. Because if a project doesn't pencil, it doesn't happen. And oftentimes in your development agreements, you will have specific triggers. And so the example I had, the last one where they removed the pedestrian bridges, they, at a certain number of houses, they had to put that pedestrian infrastructure in. And they had reached the point where it was no longer feasible for them to put the infrastructure in. So what it did is it did create a point where the developer had to go back to the jurisdiction and have that hard conversation about how are we going to amend our CEQA document and our mitigation plan and our development agreement so that you can finish the development, but we are going to willingly give up this amenity. And in the end, that was what the solution that was came to was. And it was a focus on because it was mostly within the air quality mitigation plan, which focuses on ozone precursors and not VMT, that's what was determined was the most appropriate way forward. When you're putting your agreements together, if low VMT and complete communities is a priority, you can have those triggers and have the developer bond against things, but then that does lead to risk. We have had developers who have put in a lot of upfront infrastructure and then 2008 happens and it creates a lot of problems down the line. So I have found that we've been trying to find this delicate balance between sort of pay as you build and making sure that there's enough there. And I've seen both be successful, but typically you'll be asking for a larger Mello-Roos so that the clubhouse and the pool and all the other pieces get in first, and then the developer can use that as an attraction to make the community build faster. That seems to be something that works out well for the communities that can afford it.
It seems like, the developers are now looking at, okay, how can I exceed their expectations and slide through? I mean, they have that mindset now. It seems like.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Director Kozlowski.
Yeah, I actually have a similar question. The picture you showed and the community that you were describing at one point was Folsom. And one of the challenges that we're seeing right now is that we've got 8,000 odd residents down there and the grocery stores on the other side of the freeway. So, Is there conceptually, there is this thing called the social cost of carbon emissions? Is there an equivalent measurement for VMT or a concept for VMT where we could, if a community wanted to, incentivize a grocery store company to build before all the rooftops that they would usually use as a measurement are completed? So that they have an underperforming store for some period of time and we close the gap for them? Because that's not within the purview of the developer per se. That's more a retail business decision. But that's a huge number of trips, for instance.
So I'm thinking about other examples where this is done, and probably the most common mechanism has been for food deserts, where a government will go in and support redevelopment, we don't have that anymore, of a grocery store in a community that doesn't have one, so that the infrastructure and other pieces are ready. You could also put that into the requirements where the developer cannot build, once you hit your 10,000th home or whatever person or whatever your metric is, you have to figure out a way to get a 10,000 square foot grocery store that sells these things. And then you can just say, and then they will find a store and they will subsidize as necessary until it
I don't want to
happens.
be the guy that tells Toll Brothers, hey, go find a deal with Safeway. I want the city to make a deal where
Yeah.
Safeway feels comfortable coming sooner. Okay, my other question, and then I will shut up. Shoot, I may have lost it. I hadn't really absorbed the idea that part of the polluting effect of a vehicle mile traveled was brake dust, crumb rubber, and damage to the road in terms of, cement being, spalled off a little bit. Is there some measurement of those heavier particulates that happen from automobile travel that is separate from the emissions? Because I've always thought of VMT as being a proxy for greenhouse gases, but it's actually a proxy for a combination of those things. So how do you disaggregate that part?
So Air Resources Board has different models. And so when you drive a vehicle down the road, there's the running emissions, there's the start and stop emissions, there's the brake dust, there's the dust from the road. There's all of these pieces that are aggregated up. And the public health sector has also looked at VMT from a health standpoint. So the more VMT you have, the more collisions you're going to have. The more VMT you have, the more sedentary people tend to be. And so it increases all sorts of other health risks. So there's a lot of literature on not just pollution associated with VMT, but also other negative social impacts.
So Air Resource Board has a disaggregation of the
Yes.
direct polluting components of that. Okay.
And we can share that with you if you'd like.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, fascinating. I was up last night till 12:30, testifying in West Sacramento in regards to one of the case studies that was shown here not very long ago, the Yarborough project in West Sacramento. And it's exactly what you were describing, this notion that, these development agreements are structured so that they are triggers in there to incentivize this ability to sort of create a green community rather than having these multiple, vehicle miles traveled for every single little thing. And then subsequently creating emissions that we all are trying to fight against. So it's an amazing experiment in trying to figure out how to find that sweet spot, knowing that full well the plan is likely to change, given that this particular one, the environmental impact report is nearly 16 years old, right? So things have changed. I mean, not drastically, but enough for folks to question whether or not the EIR is sufficient. So, and that was the debate last night. So. Good example. Very good. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much. If there are no other questions.
And for the record, there's no public comment on this item.
And for the record, there are no public comments on this item, as the attorney sits quietly waiting for me. All right. Okay. So with that requires no action. It was informational only, correct? You need nothing else from us as staff. That then means that we are looking for any updates or any comments, final comments by members of the committee. And if not, it says here, the next meeting will be on December 5th. Very good. Just confirming. So the next meeting of this committee will be on September or excuse me, December 5th, here in the same boardroom. So with that, if there are no other comments or
Chair
questions.
Villegas, just a
Yes.
reminder, board meeting a week early this month, so it's next Thursday, November 14th, to avoid CSAC. I believe we have a 9 a.m. start time, Robert, and yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Correct.
yes, there we
9
go, there we go.
Is it
All right.
here?
Sorry, it's here.
Here.
Yep,
Yep.
it's
All
here.
right.
Here, next Thursday, a week today, 9 a.m.
Very good. So regular board meeting next Thursday, 9 a.m. is what I said. Okay. With that, if there are no other comments, 3 o'clock just about, we are adjourned.